On this, the 75th anniversary of D-Day, I've chosen to do a reflection on two different words, definition, and how they work in our world and how they affect our lives. The two words, unintended and unforeseen. Unintended comes from the word intend, which comes from intention, which means you knew and planned for it. You meant for it to occur. Unforeseen comes from foreseen, which means foreseeable. It was plannable. You could see what was to come. You knew that it was a consequence of what you were doing. For instance, it wasn't a correlation. It was a direct result of. When you drive a car at 50 miles an hour into a brick wall, a foreseeable event is the car will be destroyed, and so will the driver. Comes under the heading of duh. So there are many acts which people use these words interchangeably, but with the different meanings they should not be. If you point a gun and shoot at someone, the inevitable consequence thereof is the substantial bodily harm or death of the individual at whom the gun is pointed. His death is foreseen consequence of the gun byplay, not an unforeseen consequence. It was planned event as soon as the gun was aimed at the individual. It was an intended event. It was not an unintended consequence. But the motive, whether or not they meant to kill that person, that's something for the courts. Either way, the person bearing the brunt of the action's consequence is not the one who shot the gun, but is the one who was shot. So the one who is alive, who is going to prison, who is rationalizing and mitigating his responsibility in his mind and to everyone who listens to him, is not the one bearing the consequence. He is the one who is called on to bear the responsibility, which is proper, but he doesn't have to suffer consequence of it. Forever his actions are and were foreseeable and also intervenable upon. At any time they could have been stopped and the victim could have been saved and alived. And that's where you come into the section of the but-fors arguments. But for a gun owner with a higher level of responsibility, but for a gun owner with a higher level of duty of care, but for bullets being stored separately, but for guns not being sold, but for guns not being manufactured. And the replies to all the but-fors are from the walk along the Egyptian river that all start with yeah but. Yeah but the Second Amendment allows us to own guns. Yeah but guns don't kill people. People kill people. And such trite responses when you're not bearing the consequence of the stupidity. Being able to distinguish between what is foreseen and what is intended will clear up other issues. And who bears the ultimate responsibility and burden for the behavior? Think of all the situations in which the words unintended and unforeseen are used. Think of today's political climate, and think especially of economics. Right now, with tariffs, we are, through the actions of our president, walking into a repeat of the history of the Depression of 1929. Read your history books, people. We had Hoover setting up tariffs and isolationist policies post-World War I, where we had tariff after tariff after tariff that put isolationist practices of both our financial and our diplomatic, just like is happening now. Those isolationist, both economic and diplomatic, result in unintended consequence of other countries benefiting financially now, not then. All because Trump is going unilaterally imposing all these tariffs on China and every bloody other country. All of the other countries in the world are taking over all of the US contracts, and they are benefiting. So the unintended consequence is the steel farmers who were first intended to benefit from these tariffs. Stupid that they are. I am an economist trained. The steel manufacturers, the farmers, they are suffering the consequence. They are bearing the burden, like the man who took the bullet. But the responsibility is all Trump's. The responsibility is the government's, but they are not bearing the consequence. The farmers who will be losing their farms, the steel companies that will have to file bankruptcy, etc. Those are the people who suffer the consequence of these unintended behaviors. The foreseeable part is, if you read history, yes, I have a degree in history too, you could see this was happening. Taxes. Taxes are used to change behavior. Example, cigarettes. We raised the tax on cigarettes to cause people to quit smoking. It worked for about 72% of smokers. But for the remaining 28%, it hardened them to the behavior. So now it is impossible to extinguish that behavior. Thus, those people who still smoke, though they're paying $7 a pack, they will not quit through taxes. They will have to quit through a reverse incentive to quit. In other words, we have to pay them to quit. Yeah. They are bearing both the consequence, the tax, and the responsibility. They have the cancer, the health issues, everything associated. They are bearing both the burden and the responsibility. And back to politics, we have consequence and unintended issues with the border. The people bearing the consequence of the behavior are all of those people coming up from South America and the communities of Mexico and South Texas, etc. But the people who are dying, those children, they do not have any reason to die except for the lack of humanity in the Trump administration. When you have walked for 15 days, you are going to be ill. You are going to be dehydrated. You do not need to be sleeping outside on gravel without a blanket and without any hydration. That is what the Trump administration is doing, thinking, oh, let's make them sleep outside in the cold for 3 nights before we give them anything. That will make them turn around and go home. No, that is just killing them. So that the 7 children now dead, and their families, and the 182 children still separated from their families 9+ months. They're bearing the consequence. Not Trump. Not this government. You can force them to suffer the consequence. Do so. Same with gun control. Make the politicians suffer the consequence of listening to the NRA instead of listening to you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bear no burden for someone else. Have no consequence that is not yours. Take the responsibility for actions that are yours, but no consequences and no unintended consequences.